Hello students, we have discussed the background of the Cronulla riot in the previous recording, but now I will discuss the actual event, the Cronulla riots that took place between the Anglo-Australians and Lebanese Australians in Sydney in December 2005. So what I discussed was that the riot is always a triggering factor. It can erupt in a spur of the moment, but the tensions, it has already been built up for some time, and finally through the riots, the conflict between the groups is exposed. In this slide, the Anglo-Australians are holding the Australian flag at the Cronulla beach. By holding the Australian flag, they are exhibiting that the Cronulla beach belongs to them and others are not welcome. In this context, they mean that the Lebanese Australians are not welcome. So the flag indicates who belongs and who does not. The Anglo-Australians are claiming that the beach is theirs. So on this day, on 11th December 2005, about 5,000 Anglo-Australians gathered to fight against the Lebanese Australians. And the reason so many people could gather at the Cronulla beach on 11th December 2005 because of the social media. The rioters, they sent messages through their phones to their fellow sympathizers and supporters, and that is how about 5,000 Anglo-Australians gathered at the Cronulla beach. This image shows the conflict between the Anglo-Australians and the Lebanese Australians during the Cronulla riots. The police is holding the Lebanese Australians and the Anglo-Australian is threatening the Lebanese Australian with his fist and of course showing that the beach belongs to them. So I have written a paper on the Cronulla riot, how one newspaper represented the event, and it is assigned as mandatory reading to the students. So in that paper I have shown how during a crisis, and in this case during the Cronulla riot, the media took the side of the Anglo-Australians. So the media representation, the Australian newspaper, has been biased during this conflict. This picture shows this young man. He has written on his chest, "We grew here and you flew here." So we grew here in this context. It means that they are the Australian born, they are the real Australians who belong to the country, and you flew here means you are all immigrants, and so you cannot claim the territory. And by the side of this picture you can see the Prime Minister. At that time it was Prime Minister John Howard. He played down the racism and he had his comment that went for the Anglo Australians. So he said that we are not a bunch of racists. So it is not helpful in this context, because a politician needs to be neutral in such crisis. So here the image shows a person wearing a t-shirt which says walk free zone. Walk was a derogatory word that used to be used for the immigrants such as Italians and Greeks. So it says that walk free zone, so immigrants are not welcome here. The other slide shows a derogatory word for the Muslims, Lebanese Muslims, or Lebanese Australians. Many of them are Muslims. So here it is a derogatory word for the Muslims prophet, for our prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and such abusive words, derogatory words, is not useful and unacceptable in the Australian society. Australian society has a multicultural policy which is a fair go for all people. This slide shows how the Anglo Australians are claiming that the Cronulla beach is there, and they are yelling, and you can see in the right how violent their actions have become. This slide has a background story. In October 2001, Prime Minister John Howard, for his re-election, he had a election slogan: "We decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come." He had this election campaign slogan because he wanted to deter the arrival of the asylum seekers or the refugees on Australian shores. So in August 2001, some asylum seekers arrived on the Australian shores, but Prime Minister John Howard refused to accept them. And hence he had this slogan, "We decide who come to this country." So here in this slide, the cartoonist Alan Moyer is critical of the Prime Minister because he had supported, or he was sided with, the Anglo-Australians during the Cronulla riot. So the caption being critical of Prime Minister John Howard, who said we are not a bunch of racists during the Cronulla riot. So the caption says, "We shall determine who comes to our suburbs." So another meaning of this caption could be, it is the Anglo-Australians who were following Prime Minister's John Howard's divisive rhetoric, and similarly, they also had the tone similar to the Prime Minister that we shall determine who comes to our suburbs and the manner in which they come. In this slide, we can see that a Lebanese Australian, so he is being held by two police officers during the riot. So tensions has built up for the riots earlier, and it triggered into a riot on December 11th, 2005, and in 2005, December 12th, the Lebanese Australians had their reprisal attack on the Anglo-Australians. So after the riots, there was a positive outcome. The two city councils worked together for social cohesion and cultural coexistence. The Cronulla Beach was under the Sutherlandshire Council, and the Lebanese Australian came from Bankstown, the Western Sydney, and so the Bankstown City Council, they worked together, and here we see the Anglo-Australians and the Lebanese Australians are shaking hand, and as I said, people started working for cultural coexistence after the riot. Thank you.